that gives us a quick, broad overview of what economics is all about, but it boils down to the idea of choices. And the choices that you make are critical to determining what happens in economics. I'm going to close this. There we go. And so as we look at economics as a science, and it really is a science, and it's a study of trends and how things have happened in the past to try to predict and try to figure out what might happen in the future. And so we look at the science here of economics, and I have a big textbook definition for you. It is the study that considers the conditions affecting production, distribution, and consumption of the material means of satisfying human desires. I'm not going to ask you to repeat that at any point. However, take a look at some of the highlights. We are looking at conditions. What changes each of these things that affect production? So a company is making donuts. So what affects their production of donuts? Well, perhaps there is a shortage on sugar supply in the world. That is something we're going to take a look at. Distribution. Well, if we have, I don't remember if it was your group or maybe it was yesterday, they were talking about automated semi-trucks on the road. And this guy was testing it, driving an 18-wheeler, and he had his hands off the wheel, and I can't imagine there's anything in it, but still, it just was a little nerve-wracking. But distribution, what's going on with our transportation industry? How are we going to distribute it, or even our packaging? Amazon is trying to answer that question as best as possible, even exploring the use of drones to be able to distribute their product. And then consumption, that deals with you and me for the most part. Who is consuming those donuts, and who is going to be buying those things? And yes, I am going to talk a lot about food just because it relates to all of us, and I love food, and so you may get hungry in this class. I'm sorry, just the way it is. All of those things are going to be described in economics to satisfy human desires, because we all have desires, and all of us have things that we want. And so the scientific process applies here to economics just like it would in any other scientific study. So you're going to have things like observation, hypothesis, and alteration of variables. So we're going to take a look at a particular donut shop. And we know that in this town or in this area, there are two major donut places. Maybe you throw in a third one there if you were a Dunkin' Donuts fan. But you've got Mary Lou's and you have the Flour Mill. And those are the places that you're going to go to find donuts. Well, if we're trying to figure out why one may be doing better than another, we're going to observe. We're going to come up with a hypothesis as to why we think that the other may be doing better, why they're making more sales. I know Flour Mill's opening up a new place at the north end. So I'm sure they went through some of this economic questioning, decision making, as they were observing, is there a market for a new location? Is there an opportunity there? Come up with a hypothesis, and then once the store opens, they may have to alter some of those variables. Do they need to do more marketing? Do they need to adjust the amount of donuts they're producing? A lot of variables can be addressed there. Taking a different path, choosing different choices. So why do we make choices? Well, we make choices because of a term called insatiability. So on the side of your notes here, or on a scrap piece of paper, if I were to give you, and by the way, this is just total hypothesis, fiction, it's not happening. If I were to give you $5,000 right now, if I had the ability to wire you that money, Google Wallet that to you, whatever you prefer to use, I'm going to send that to you right now. I got $5,000 in cash. Write down what you're going to do with that in your paper or on your computer. What are you doing with $5,000? What are you spending it on? You know what? Let's make it $10,000. I think that's more fun. You got $10,000, okay? $10,000. You do not have the option to invest or put it in a savings account. That's the condition. There was a movie made way back in the 80s where this guy had a rich uncle, inherited, I think it was $100 million. But there was a condition attached to that will where he had to spend all of it. And he could not have anything, I think he had 30 days to spend it. He could not have anything to his name at the end of that 30 days. If he was successful in that, then he inherited the whole lump sum, which was like $2 billion or something like that. Crazy. It's kind of an interesting scenario. Now, excuse me. So I want you to think about $10,000. What are you buying? $10,000. What's one of the things that you have on your wish list?
A semester's worth of tuition.
Semester's worth of tuition. You're going to put it down on that. Good. What else, David? Reliable car. A reliable car. I'd be with you on that one. I'd probably go that direction too. Okay? Food, $10,000 worth of donuts and coffee. Man. You're not buying that for $10,000, I don't think. What else are you buying? What are you buying, Sadie? Tuition. Okay? Mary Ellen, what are you buying? New car. Nice. Okay? Send your parents on vacation. Wow, you're giving to somebody else. Now, you just spent that $10,000, whatever it was on your list. We heard from a few of you. I'm going to give you $500,000 now. You got $500,000. Okay? So for $500,000, some of you just spent $10,000, and for some of you it was real easy. You knew exactly what you wanted. You got $500,000. And already I started to hear people talk about, well, college is taken care of. Maybe I'm going to look at buying a house. Okay? That's the next thing immediately on your list. How many of you would have a hard time making a decision on $500,000, on what you're going to spend it on? Okay? A couple of you would. How many of you, pretty easily, you know exactly what you'd buy? Where'd that money go? Okay, hands down. So you have spent that $500,000 in your mind. Now I'm going to give you $2 million. You've got $2 million. Now what are you going to buy? Now what's on your target list with $2 million in the bank? You've already spent $10,000 to begin with. Then you spent $500,000. And I told you investing and saving it in the bank is not an option. Now you have $2 million. Okay? Okay. No taxes involved. You got $2 million. What do you spend it on? You're going to buy an island with $2 million. Okay. All right. Private jet. What else are you buying? So I did this once with a field trip where we did this at the mall. We didn't go to $2 million, but I said that you have $50,000 on a spreadsheet. You have to spend it all or spend as much as you can at the mall. In this condition, you cannot buy more than one thing at a single store. So you can't just go buy a whole jewelry store. You have to buy something that's tangible that you could actually take home. And you had to do it within an hour. I only had 2 people complete it. And they were very strategic in the way that they spent their money around the mall. It's harder than you think to spend that money. But here's what I want you to understand. Insatiability is, for some of you, a really easy idea to think of when you think of how much money you could spend. If it were free money, you had to spend it, you've immediately got a list. This is what I buy, this is what I buy, this is what I buy. Now, the value would change depending upon how much money you have, or the products that you would buy would vary on that. Some of you would go for bigger items. Some of you would buy a lot of smaller items. Insatiability is that we always have unlimited wants. If money were no object, and we could just go buy anything that we want, we could easily find that. And we could keep finding new things. This is why our market is driven the way it is, and why there's always a newer version of Madden every summer that comes out because people want something newer and better. They have unlimited wants. Or newer version of the Ford Focus. I'm still driving the really, really old version of it, and it works great. But insatiability is illustrated with our cell phones as well. When you think about the phone that you have in your backpack, your pocket, that I'm sure is powered off, and that you are not tempted to pull out and use during school, when you look at that phone, remember the first day that you got that phone? Came out of the box, you opened it up, and as you think about that phone, you're like, this is it right here. This is what I've been waiting for. Now, I understand some of you, if you had a used phone or if you didn't buy it yourself, or there's all the factors in there. But just imagine for a moment. Okay, you get that brand new phone out, and it is sleek, no scratches, no cracks. It is the newest, top of the line. You're just loving that phone, day one. And then after a few days, weeks, a few months, you've dropped it once, twice, 18 times. And now it doesn't quite have that same shine to it. And then all of a sudden, a friend comes up to you and they've got a newer phone. Or iPhone announces, we've got a new model coming out, and this one has the face technology, and mine just has the thumbprint. Man, I'm like old school now. I'm like my parents. No. Oh, wait, sorry. Insatiability is that we always have unlimited wants and desires for something new and something better. And that's what forces us to make decisions. When we compare this with scarcity. Now, scarcity is not that, scarcity is not the idea that everything is limited, that we can't have everything. It's that there's not enough resources, whether it's financial or whether it's actually product resources, for us to have everything. Okay, so everything is limited in quantity, and understanding that, if your parents are like mine, they always told me, you can't have everything you want. I repeat that to my kids now quite often, and I remind us that we can't have those unlimited lists of wants. Because I want to remind us what 1 Timothy 6 says. 1 Timothy 6 says that the eyes of man are never satisfied. And I think that's true when we look at our world. When we look at the products that are out on the market, and we look at commercials, we don't have to go far. The eyes of man are never satisfied. We're always wanting something else. So everything is limited in quantity. You can't have everything that you want. Resources are limited. However, our wants are unlimited. And so because of that, a decision has to be made. When you put those things together, we have a massive list. We've all just finished Christmas, and some of you may still write out a Christmas list for mom or dad or grandma. And if you have learned this well, you have figured out how to creatively make that list to try to maximize your return. Some of you may just throw a massive list together, and like I did when I was 6, I went through the catalog and I just wrote down everything that I thought was cool. I got none of it. That's okay. My parents still love me, and I turned out just fine. But a choice has to be made. When we combine these two ideas, we have unlimited wants, yet things are scarce. So when it applies to economics, when you are operating a business, or when you are running your own personal finances, there are certain questions that have to be asked here when we combine these two ideas of insatiability and scarcities. We have to think, what goods are going to be produced? As the owner of my donut shop, I've got to think about, what type of donuts am I going to make? Am I going to make cake donuts that are primarily baked in the oven, and I'm going to glaze them over, and those are going to be the type of donuts that I make? Am I going to make fried donuts that are made with a little more yeast, and then I'm going to glaze those over as well? Am I going to do a combination of both? What's going to sell? Am I going to make chocolate donuts, vanilla donuts, maple donuts with bacon on top? Then I need to determine, how are those goods going to be produced? am I going to buy a machine to produce those donuts, or am I going to hire employees to handcraft those donuts? How many of you have ever been inside a Krispy Kreme and seen the wonderfulness of their automated donut system? Okay, several of you on this side of the room have seen it. If you've not been in one, do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, brief overview here. This is important education stuff here. Krispy Kreme has a automated system that makes all their donuts for them. Now the dough is loaded into this hopper. It filters, kind of oozes down into the cutter. The cutter then produces each and every one of these donuts, drops them into the hot oil. Or, well, before it gets in hot oil, I think it goes through the oven, and it's got this conveyor belt that kind of goes up and down through this hot oven, raises the donuts first, and then it drops it into the oil, fries it, and then there's a flipper in the oil that flips them over, and then they continue this wonderful lazy river of boiling hot oil, and then it pops up out of the oil and goes onto a conveyor belt that lets the oil dry off of them, and then the magic happens where they go very gently and in serene fashion underneath this wonderful waterfall of white glaze. That is like my ultimate bucket list right there. I want to be glazed on the conveyor belt of Krispy Kreme.
I want to be glazed.
I mean, could you just imagine laying on that conveyor belt, mouth open, and just, that needs to happen someday. Now,
There's some sanitation questions.
well, yeah, probably. So, am I gonna do it that way? The workers there are simply making sure the machine is operating clearly and working effectively, and then they pull the donuts off the conveyor belt, stick them in the boxes. They're not actually making the donuts. Now, if you go into another donut shop, they may actually be hand cutting out those donuts and hand placing them into the fryer and pulling them out with utensils and then glazing them themselves, doing a lot more hands-on work. You got to decide how those are going to be produced. Thank you. Who's going to consume the donuts that we've created? Yeah, well, we know that we're hoping to get customers into our doors, but let's just say that we are going to open up our own donut shop here in this econ class. And we are going to answer these questions. What type of donuts are we going to make? How are we going to make them? I know some of you seniors, you guys make pizzas on Wednesday mornings, so those questions are being answered. If we're going to open up a donut shop and actually run it out of this classroom, we're going to have to answer these questions. Okay, who's going to consume this product? Well, who's going to be our primary target audience that we're going to try to sell these to? Police officers? We get very many police officers coming through our campus?
Sometimes.
Yeah, we get a few once in a while. Not on a regular basis to operate a profitable business. So who would be a better potential client that we would want to sell these donuts to? Teachers. Who else? Students. Okay. So we're thinking teachers, students, maybe some parents. If we really get a lot of publicity, we might be able to reach the community a little bit more too. But we're going to start with the people around us. So if we know that students and teachers, maybe some parents, are going to be our primary consumers, what are some important things to consider when we are setting up this donut shop? What do we know about the finances of most students in our school? It varies. Okay. Now, if we're thinking about high school students, all right, we want to think as broad as possible. Think about high school students. They might have some cash on them. They might not. Kind of 50-50. You never know. What about middle school students? Probably a little bit less. Elementary students? Probably not. So how could we reach those elementary students when they're not going to have cash on them? Put on a school bill. Give them an opportunity to charge. Now, let's think about middle school and high school, especially if we are considering the fact that, all right, if we have students that have a whole bunch of money in their pocket, they're going to buy it if they want it. We're not going to worry about them. It's the ones that may not have a whole lot of money. What do we need to do about pricing with our donuts? We make them expensive, or are we going to sell very many? Probably not.
Think they're getting a deal.
Make them think they're getting a good deal. So we're going to want to make sure that we are either competitively priced with what they could get at Meijer or Walmart or Dunkin' Donuts on their way into school, or we want to make sure that we're giving them a better deal. So we want to make sure that we're considering our consumers here as we are making our production. And then who's going to make these decisions? I think if we learn nothing from our election and campaign back in November, that we don't all agree on things. We have a lot of different opinions. So if we were to actually set this up and run this business, we would have a lot of opinions on what we're going to produce, how they're going to be produced, who is going to be our target customer, how much we're going to sell it for, who is actually going to operate and run this. There's a lot of questions to be answered. And if we decide we are just going to let Jake make all these decisions, whether Jake wants to or not, we're just going to put it on him, and now he gets to run our operation. There's going to be some of you that says, no way in the world is he making that decision. Now, hopefully it's not a personal thing. Maybe it's just you want to be involved in it, but you know Jake's not going to listen to you. And so you have to determine when you are running a business or when you are considering some of these economic choices, who is going to make those decisions for you? When you are looking at your own personal finances, who's making those decisions? Well, for the most part, it's going to be you. But there are some things, we talked about fixed expenses the other day, that some of those decisions that you have made have longer consequences or have longer effects on your finances to where you no longer have a decision to make or no longer allowed to make your own decision. For instance, you tie yourself up into a car loan for the next 5 years. You buy a car, you don't have the cash to pay for it up front, and so you put yourself into a finance situation, and you get 2 years into that car, you still like the car, you're driving it, it works fine, but you're still paying monthly payments on it, and so that's $250 that is tied up as a fixed expense that you have no decision, no ability to change that moving forward until that loan is paid off. Now, I'm not arguing for or against that. I'm just saying that that's important to understand, that that decision that you made 2 years ago is still following you, and now you're locked into it. And so be careful about who you're allowed to make those decisions or how they're being made. Okay, so when we look at the choices that we're making, all of our choices are based upon our own values. So as you can tell, I value donuts pretty highly. They have a lot of value to me. I'm going to spend my money on those when I have opportunities to do so. For some of you, you may be on a diet. You may not like donuts, in which case you may feel free to leave at this point. Or you may prefer something different. Maybe you like a muffin or a bagel. Bagel's just a healthy donut. And when we look at the choices that we make, they're based on the things that we hold dear and that we value. And so those are important to understand when we are considering the choices that we make. Your values are going to be different from somebody else. And so this is part of why when I look at your budgets, I may make suggestions based on where I think you may need to make changes. But unless I see something glaring, I'm going to let you make those decisions based on your own values and where you want to place your money. So while I don't have a whole lot of investment into online gaming, I'm not going to pay for a subscription or pay for a monthly fee of some sort to play a certain online game. For others of you, that may be something that is really important, and it's your entertainment that you get to relax and just enjoy and play with your friends and have fun. And so if you put that in your budget, I'm not going to say, well, that's a waste of money. Even though in my mind, I would think it's a waste of my money. For you, you may put a lot of investment in that. You may look at me and you may see the things that I spend my money on. And when I decide to go out and to buy new shoes for my son, you may say, that's a waste of money. But for me, that's a priority. I want to make sure he's wearing good shoes. The value is different on the individual. And our individual values are reflected in the choices that we make. Hebrews 11:25 talks about Pharaoh, talks about Moses after leaving the household of Pharaoh. Says he chose rather to be mistreated with the people of God than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. And by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch him. I think there's a good example here of Moses doing something that nobody else would understand, making a personal value-based judgment in the decision that he made to leave Pharaoh's house, to leave the pleasures of the wealth of the greatest kingdom of the earth at that time, to go and live with this slave people. It was because that's what God wanted him to do. And so we look at this from a biblical perspective, that a biblical economist is somebody that's going to exercise wisdom in making the choices that they make with the goal of pleasing Christ through those decisions. As I told you the other day, money is a very important tool in our world, and it's even more important for us as Christians and followers of Christ to view money